He froze when the towel slipped from my body, and I didn't cover myself, I didn't apologize, I didn't pretend, I just stood there, bare and breathing, watching the shock in his eyes soften into something goals. Not shame, not judgment, just raw, unfiltered presence. And in that charged silence I felt it, not like Amather, not like a wife, just a woman who finally stopped hiding from her own hunger. My name is Vanessa, I'm 43, and this story doesn't begin with infidelity, or lust, or even loneliness, it begins with logistics. 3 months ago my husband, Greg, asked if his son could move back in with us for a little while. Elijah had just gone through a breakup, something about a long-distance girlfriend, who decided she needed space, which we all know is breakup code for something else. And Greg offered up our spare bedroom bare, even checking with me. I didn't mind. At least that's what I told myself after all. I wasn't his mother, I was just a woman who'd entered Elijah's life when he was 16, already taller than me, withdrawn, already skeptical af whatever role I was supposed to play. He never called me mom, I never asked him t'd been civil over the years, even warm and good days he'd send the occasional birthday text with a smiley face emoji that felt more like punctuation than sentiment. And once when I was sick with flu, he made me tea without buying gasked. He didn't stick around to see if he drank it, but the gesture was enough to surprise me. Greg was thrilled when Elijah came home. Our fridge suddenly had protein shakes again. Our laundry double-door hallway smelled like expensive alkalage and something else I couldn't quite place, like rain-soaked cedar and static electricity. At first I treated his presence like any other visitor. I wore robes, I closed doors, I didn't let myself notice how his voice had deepened since college, or how Howd started reading philosophy books at kitchen counter, underlining whole paragraphs without ever breaking posture. But the truth is, a me thing shifted in me the day he moved. Not because of anything he did, but of everything I hadn't felt in a long time. Greg and we were steady, predictably, for 9 years, and content mostly paid bills on time. We folded sheets dogger. We went to Costco and bought things in bulk. We didn't need vitamins, dish soap, boredom, but comfort has acidocyde, it dulls your edges, it maki-su. Forget how it feels to be looked at like you might be dangerous. And Elijah didn't look at me at all, which somehow made me more aware of his presence than if he had. The house grew smaller, or maybe I just started noticing how often we crossed paths. The hallway, the laundry room, the fridge door that opened just as I reached for something. We'd exchange brief nods, polite hells, but catch him glancing away too quickly, and I couldn't tell if it was embarrassment or restraint. Either way, started waking up earlier, doing my makeup before coffee, wearing the thinner robe, and if you're already judging me for that good, it means you're paying attention. Base, this isn't a story about right or wrong, it's a story about what happened when you've spent too long buying invaded someone finally looks your way. It started with laundry, mundane kind, the kind you forget you even did until you find warm towels in a basket. 2 days later, had just finished folding the last sheet when I realized I hadn't emptied the dryer, and by realized I mean I heard the door open, the rumble of someone else's hand pulling out fabric that didn't belong to me. Walked into the laundry room barefoot, me robe tied loosely at the waist, hair damp from a shower I hadn't planned but somehow needed, and there he was, Elijah, standing there holding one of my missiles in his hand like it was radioactive. Didn't speak at first, just glanced ATM and looked down quickly, cheeks flushed. Didn't mean to began, it's just laundry, I said, trying to sound unfazed, but it wasn't, not really, because vecha masal was silk, and silk by nature suggests something softer, something made for skin, not sorting. And the way he held it, thumb brushing the fingers clenching slightly, told me heffled that too. I stepped forward, took it gently from his hand, and for a second our fingers touched. That's all it was, a brush, a moment, but it lit something in I hadn't felt in years. Cleared his throat and muttered something about switching loads. I nodded, left hand. I stood there alone with a piece of fabric that suddenly felt like evidence. After that I noticed everything, how making coffee just a few minutes after me, never directly overlapping galways, just enough to cross paths in the kitchen. How he started wearing shirts that fit a little too well, sleeves rolled up to the elbows, veins visible like some casual reminder that youth isn't wasted on the young, it's weaponized. Oh, I started leaving my door open, just enough to hear him moving in the hallway or humming to music I didn't recognize. Told myself it was nothing. He was Greg's son, he was hurting, he was barely to his own father, let alone maybe in the quiet spaces. Bet when interaction shins was blooming, not lust recognition. He saw me not as a stepmother, not as a wife, but as a woman. Own morning, I walked into the kitchen in a towel. It wasn't in had just stepped out of the shower, remembered I hadn't started the dishwasher, and figured he was still asleep. He wasn't, he was at the counter back to me pouring cereal, and when head turned around slow, startled, I froze, sodded he. The towel slipped slightly At Miss Holder, his eyes widened, not in her own it in guilt but in pure unfiltered like something sacred had revealed itself by accident. I pulled the towel up, didn't look away, I didn't ask him. Tono, words were spoken, but in that moment, barefoot, half rapid holding a ceramic mug, like a shield, I realized something Devastinji didn't want him to look away. Moment. The towel hit the floor. I should have panicked but I didn't, it wasn't some grand seduction theater. Was no music, no candlelight, no deliberate tease, just me standing in the morning light of our kitchen, skin still damp, heartbeat louder than I expected, and Elijah, my stepson, not looking away. I didn't rush to pick it up, I didn't wrap myself back in modesty, I just stood there, not proud, not Ashamejasini's eyes scanned me with restraint. That made it worse. Somehow, he wasn't leering, wasn't staring like a boy who had just walked in on something forbidden, looked at me like a man who just remembered how to breathe. Took a step forward, he didn't move another. We're 2 feet apart now, and the room felt smaller. The air thicker, could hear the subtle hitch in his breath, the way his hand tightened on the edge of the counter, as if it were the only thing keeping him tethered to the version of himself he was supposed to be. You should go, I whispered, but my voice didn't carry the weight of warning. It trembled, and not with fear. I can't, he said softly, I've tried every day. Something broke in me, then quietly, like a thread snapping, after holding too much weight for too long, he reached for him. He stepped in, and when his hands touched my waist I flinched, not from him but from the surge of heat that pulsed through my chest, like lightning had found a new home. He didn't kiss me at first, he just held me, and I realized how long it had been since someone did that, not possessively, not dutifully, but with reverence. When his lips finally found mine, they didn't demand, they asked, and I said yes, to the ache, to the risk, to their reckless beautiful permission I hadn't need myself for far too long. Backed me against the wall, one arm braced above my head, the other grazing down my spine. Me knees weakened, but I didn't fall neutrally. I had already fallen. I want to pause here for a second. Because if you stayed with me this far, if this story is pulling at something inside you, if it's made you feel seen or shaken in ways you didn't expect, this is your moment to support what keeps stories like this alive. Super chats and super stickers aren't just about donations, they're a way to say keep going, to say this matters, so if it does, thank you. No, back to the fire. He lifted me, carried Menet to the bedroom, to the couch, the same couch where his father once fell asleep watching football on Sundays. He laid Med down with a gentleness that made my eyes sting, and then he kissed me like a man who had dreamed of this in silence, who had memorized every inch of me without ever daring to touch his mouth, explored slow. His hands memorized every gasp I made, every tremble was answered with stillness and patience. Soon, stillness turned to rhythm, and patience turned to something else. And really, didn't cry, not then, but inside us something did break, and for the first time in years it didn't feel like loss, it felt like release. The silence afterward was deafening, not because it was awkward or guilty, but because it was full. Elia sat at the edge of the couch, head bowed, fingers interlaced, still catching his breath. He pulled the throw blanket across my chest, not to cover but to feel something soft against my skin, something that wasn't him, something that wasn't heat. I could hear birds outside now chirping, like nothing had changed, like the sky hadn't cracked open in our living room. My legs unsteady, not from shame but from the way my body still hummed, like I was still being touched. He looked up at me then, and I'll never forget that look, not hungry, not proud, not confused, just wrecked in the most beautiful, turfering way. I didn't mean for that to happen, he said softly. I didn't answer right away, because what could I say that wouldn't unravel us further? Thought I wanted it, that I needed it, that every inch of me had been waiting for Somione to knock the dust off my skin and remind me I was more than habit and helpfulness. Instead, I sat down beside him, barely touching. Jalaj crossed a line. He nodded, eyes locked on the floor. But maybe, I whispered, it was a line he'd been standing too close to for too long. He turned to me slowly. So what? No? And that question, so simple, so human, hung between us like fog, and says, still unwilling to lift, I reached for my robe, tied it tighter than necessary, and walked to the window. The ocean was just beyond, the cliffs still gray, endless like me. I don't know, I finally said, but we can't go back. He stood. I expected him to leave. Instead, he walked over, stopped a few feet behind me, not touching. Just there. I'm not asking for a future, he said, just honesty. It or not to face him. And what if honesty's the most dangerous thing between you? Smiled, small, sad, then at least it's real. The next morning, I found Elijah on the porch, mug in hand, staring out at the fog like he was waiting for the sea to explain something. Didn't look up when I joined him, hadn't need toverthing between us. Had already been said, and skinny, I'm leaving tomorrow, said finally. I know, Daddy figured. Neither of us moved. Be okay. I Asked. He gave a soft laughy. Don't know, will you? I didn't answer because I wasn't sure either. That day moved slowly to many long silences, too much unsaid. Every sound in the house felt louder. The clink of a spoon, the creak of a chair, the way his suitcase dragged across the hallway. Like a question, I couldn't unhearth it. Evening my sister called. Ella just being quiet. She said everything. Okay. He almost said yes, almost, but I stared at me reflection in the window. Instead he didn't look like someone lying, he looked like someone deciding if she'd ever tell the truth again. He's just growing up, I replied. You know how that goes. She laughed. God, tell me about it. After we hung up, I stood alone in the kitchen, one hand on the counter, the other on my chest. My pulse was still strong, but slower now, like something had been released later. That night he came to say good. Didn't hug, we didn't cry, he just looked at me with those same storm-coloured eyes and said, you reminded me I wasn't invisible. And I whispered, you reminded me. I was still a woman. Had closed the door behind him, quiet like. He didn't want to wake the version of me that had slept through years of her own life. And if you've made it this far, if something in you stirred this, please consider supporting Thea Stories. A super chat or super sticker goes a long way to keep Thea Space alive. These aren't just confessions, they're conversations about desire, mistakes, tenderness, and how we find our way back to ourselves. You for being here, truly. The house felt different after he left, not empty, just quieter, as if it too was holding its breath. He washed the mug he used every morning, folded the blanket he used to curl up with on the couch. Little rituals, soft closures. But when I passed the mirror in the hallway, I stopped for the first time in years. I didn't look away. I saw a woman with history written into her skin. At shame but story, a woman who had allowed herself to be touched. Not just by hands but by the terrifying honest eye of being truly seen. Walked outside. The evening air was sharp. The wind pulled at the hem of my cardigan, and the sea below roared like it always had. But I was different now, not because of what happened, but because I had let it matter that night. I lit a single candle, not for amends, for remembrance. I sat at the kitchen table with a glass of wine and a single question in my heart. What if this wasn't about right or wrong? What if it was about waking up? What if the thing we're all afraid to admit is that we're lonely in rooms full of people who love us? What if the only way to stay alive is to be honest with what stirs beneath the surface? And I didn't tell my sister, and no, I won't be writing this in a journal to hide in the back of a drawer, but I will remember him not for what we did, but for what he gave me permission to feel again, to want to stop folding myself into corners, just to be manageable. If you're still watching, still here with me, this is the part where I sigh. You're not wrong for craving depth, for longing to be touched where no one else has dared to reach, not physically but emotional bliss. Maybe that's where real intimacy begins, in the silence that follows truth, in the heartbeat of a moment you never thought you were allowed to have. So if this story left a mark on you, if you saw a piece of your past or your present reflected here, I'd be honored if you'd support this channel. A super chat or super sticker is more than just a donation, it's a way of saying keep telling the stories that most people are too afraid to say out loud. And finalito, the woman watching this with Tersh can't quite you are not too much, you are not broken, you are not selfish for wanting to feel alive sometimes. The bravest thing you can do is stop apologizing for needing more. Thank you for listening. We'll speak again soon.